Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this morning. It looks like everyone from the waiting room is connected. I think you should be seeing the slides I'm sharing just with a title right now and hearing myself speak. The meeting is being recorded. We have some folks who weren't able to attend who wanted to be able to view the initial parts anyhow. I don't think we can record the breakouts later, but the main group we will have available. So we're going to start with some time of centering. As my slides go forward. By looking at Doctrine and Covenants, section 162.8. This is a scripture that World Mission Center staff have been using throughout the year for our gatherings and planning and some of our discernment. So we wanted to share that with you as well, and thought we would start this morning with a dwelling in the word practice. So we will read this scripture 3 different times. Each time will be a different question for you to think about at the top of the slide. And then after the reading, we'll have time to type thoughts in the chat, or depending on how many people want to share, we might be able to take a couple folks sharing verbally, and then there'll be a hymn to listen to or sing along to as you'd like in between the readings. So I think Carol is going to be our first reader. I think you can unmute yourself, Carol.
You are a good and faithful people, but sometimes you fail to see the power that is resident in your own story and fellowship. Look carefully, listen attentively, and sense the Spirit among you. Do not be unduly concerned with numbers. Be fervent in your witness, passionate in your discipleship, and vigorous in your labor on behalf of peace and justice. Where 2 or 3 such disciples form community, there will be the Spirit be. Many will come to see. Continue your journey, O people of the restoration. You have been blessed thus far, but there is so much yet to see, so much yet to do. Go forth with confidence and live prophetically as a people who have been loved and who now courageously choose to love others in the name of the one you serve.
So as you ponder this first reading, we're asking you to think what word, phrase, or image strikes you. You could type it in the chat. If you'd like to unmute and share, I'll allow you to unmute now. What word, phrase, or image strikes you from this scripture? I'm going to play the music for the hymn My Peace from Communion of Christ Sings. It's number 149 if you happen to have a hymnal want to follow the music. I think this will play through 4 times in total. As we listen to the scripture a second time, this time read by Talitha, we ask you to think, what speaks to your personal ministry as you hear this scripture?
You are a good and faithful people, but sometimes you fail to see the power that is resident in your own story and fellowship. Look carefully, listen attentively, and sense the Spirit among you. Do not be unduly concerned with numbers. Be fervent in your witness, passionate in your discipleship, and vigorous in your labor on behalf of peace and justice. Where 2 or 3 such disciples form community, there will the Spirit be. Many will come to see. Continue your journey, O people of the restoration. You have been blessed thus far, but there is so much yet to see, so much yet to do. Go forth with confidence and live prophetically as a people who have been loved and who now courageously choose to love others in the name of the one you serve.
What speaks to your personal ministry? You can type in the chat so we have time for a few people to share. And the next hymn for reflection is In the Crossroads of This Moment. It's number 170 in Community of Christ Sings. And for our last reading by Sarah Ellen, I'm going to ask you to think about, how does the scripture apply to the Mission Center, to the ministry of the church at large in Michigan? And hopefully we'll have a little bit of sharing and dialogue as you think about the scripture in this frame.
You are a good and faithful people, but sometimes you fail to see the power that is resident in your own story and fellowship. Look carefully, listen attentively, and sense the Spirit among you. Do not be unduly concerned with numbers. Be fervent in your witness, passionate in your discipleship, and vigorous in your labor on behalf of peace and justice. Where 2 or 3 such disciples form community, there will the Spirit be. Many will come to see. Continue your journey, O people of the restoration. You have been blessed thus far, but there is so much yet to see, so much yet to do. Go forth with confidence and live prophetically as a people who have been loved and who now courageously choose to love others in the name of the one you serve.
And then you can share your thoughts in the chat or unmute if you'd like to share thoughts on how this scripture may apply throughout the Mission Center now.
I think COVID has taught us that there are new ways to do things. And I think that we have to be open and ready to be able to see new ways to do things going forward. Especially as we come out of COVID, whenever that will actually happen. And be willing to not go back to what, only back to what we've been doing.
As our numbers have gone down, that generates a fear. And often with fear present within us, we seek for ways to control the situation around us. That seems to be just a natural way that humans respond. And yet the very first section A says to listen attentively and then pause and sense the Spirit among you. And I think we're called to sit and do that as long as it takes to avoid the control and allow God to lead us. Then we can look at letter B. Let's not be unduly concerned with numbers. We try not to be, but I think so often we are driven by the fact that so many of our friends and family are no longer witnessing with us, worshiping with us. So to let go of our fears and let God is such a tremendous challenge today, more today than perhaps it ever has been.
was afraid of what would happen to my ministry if we ever closed Ludington. But guess what I discovered? Maintaining a building, an aging building, was distracting us from what really matters. And since closing it, God has been leading me in so many new directions. But one that I never thought I'd find myself in was ministering to prison inmates. I now have 11 of them that I talk with. And I gotta tell you, these are people forgotten by society, hungry for positive news, hungry for affirmation that they still matter. And some of the strongest testimonies I have ever read are coming from some of these men who have discovered their ministry within the prison walls. So never give up, never be discouraged. God is leading the way.
You would pause with me in a moment of prayer. God, we are grateful to be able to gather together with each other through the internet, with technology. We give thanks for the many people who are here today, their years of service and ministry, but most importantly, for the relationships that they hold for their lives, for the church that is within them. We ask that in the rest of our time gathered this morning, that we may have fellowship and sharing and insight into ways that your Spirit is moving in our lives, in the community, in the church, and in the places where we go. Allow us to know where you are calling us to be awake and ready to respond, that we may live the mission of Christ as our own mission. Amen. Again, I welcome you and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. We're going to shift now into some updates and sharing. I'm going to start with a few brief reminders of things happening in the Mission Center And then we'll spend more time with Apostle Lach Mackay as he shares from the field and worldwide perspectives. Well, first, just from that scripture we've been dwelling in, the staff have chosen a phrase for the focus of this year's conferences and events, and that is courageously choose love. We've been using this graphic on social media and we'll continue to do that. Just a quick recap of our spring conference. If you weren't able to join on April 30th, it was a hybrid format, and we had 9 different speakers, a few of them Community of Christ, but most not, sharing with us from diverse perspectives in 15-minute segments on that theme, courageously choose love. So you can see some of the variety of positions they had. I just wanted to lift up that the recordings are available. Over on the right there is a link to the Mission Center YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and type in Michigan Mission Center, you should be able to find it. But these also are recorded by session. So each is about 1 hour with 3 speakers in there. And they might be helpful resources to use in small groups, classes, worship setting, some interesting 15-minute, not quite polished sermons on demand, but interesting perspectives on courageously choose love. So I encourage you to check those out and use them as you may have opportunities. Also want to just continue to lift up the online ministries that have developed within the Michigan Mission Center. There are many others outside Michigan as well that are great things and people are enjoying. Here, what we're sponsoring on Mondays at 1 o'clock is God Without Borders. Karen's already invited you to that. Then on Monday evenings is now when the Sanctuary Group, the junior and senior high E's start. We're excited. Our leaders have graciously volunteered to go visit several of those youth camps this summer and they're going to be taking a break from the online sessions over the summer while youth can go to camps, but they've got some great energy and are hoping to restart that in the fall with some in-person connections and hopefully more people getting involved throughout next year. Little Fish is on Tuesday nights. That's for younger youth. It's a much shorter, about 20 minutes. Then they read a story and have a brief sharing and conversation. And then Wednesday nights for any ages really, but more geared towards adults, is the midweek connections. It's using the small group worship resources in an online setting. A lot of sharing and connecting. Of course, it's the time of year when we're thinking about all of our summer camps. So we want to highlight and make sure you know the registrations are open for youth camps and family camps. We're really hoping people will continue to sign up for those. We're asking all the youth who want to come to camp to register by June 1st so we can ensure we have staff and space. After that date, we will look at how many spots we have available based on our counselors and cabins and put out how many more spots we can accept. But anybody you know who's got a youth coming to camp, I'll encourage them to register online by June 1st, sooner the better. It is a pretty traditional year. We don't really have any restrictions at this point, other than youth are required to have a negative COVID test coming to camp. That can now be either a PCR or a rapid test. Either are acceptable. And if they have trouble with getting that test, they can contact their camp director and make arrangements with them. Family camps will be back close to normal, a little bit more relaxed in some ways, but many of the things we're used to will be happening there, reunions. So I encourage you to sign up for those. And then finally, Spectacular at Graceland is back after 2 years. And so any senior high youth are encouraged to consider that. We do have a bus booked. The Michigan delegation cost is $425, and we do have financial assistance up to that full amount available from the Disciple Development Fund. So money should be no barrier. If youth are available and want to go, we would love to have them on the bus and out there enjoying Spec this summer. A quick preview of the fall conference. It's a little ways away, but it's never too early to start thinking about that. It is the first weekend in November again. It will be similar to last year, in person at Blue Water Campground or online via Zoom. We'll do both hybrid options. Meals and activities, in addition to the Saturday morning business, will be determined closer to the date, depending on what's happening in the world and volunteers and everything else. One item we'll have on this agenda that we wouldn't normally have every year is the World Conference delegate election. Lach's going to be sharing more about World Conference items, but if you want to be a World Conference delegate, you'll need to nominate yourself either before conference or during the voting, and that'll be an item we need to take care of. As I mentioned, our theme will be courageously choose love as we are using throughout the year. So just pastors got this information and they kind of know about meetings and that administrative side, but for you to start thinking and encouraging people to be thinking about next April World Conference. We'd love to fill our delegation. I don't think I've seen our number of delegates yet for World Conference, but we usually have many seats for the people who want to go. And we'd love to have them all filled up. And we do have the Disciple Development Fund to assist people with those costs if they're traveling out to Independence next April. And then I think my final update, a year ago during this gathering, we shared some ideas for the transition of the Campus Ministry Center. Since that time, we've been working through that transition. We are ready now to relaunch the building in a slightly adjusted format. We'll have the primary uses that are outlined there. It'll still be the East Lansing Congregation in-person meeting location. We'll have young adult activities there as determined with the congregation and other volunteers who might lead them. We have formed a Community of Christ library. So we've gathered resources from congregations that have closed, and we're storing all church produced materials, 1 copy of everything we get in there. We have, in addition to books, we also have like projector screens and hymnals and TVs, labyrinths, chairs, speaker systems, all kinds of things that we can rent out if you're having an outside event or need a system or something to do a community project. Whatever you might have in mind, let us know. We may have it there to use. And then we'll also be using the building for small group retreats, both day and overnight usage, personal sabbatical stays. So this is for you and other ministers, if you'd like to have a place to get away, to prepare for a sermon, a class, a blessing, study for, small group, book club, anything that you might need time and space to get away, or if people want to come work remotely and have a place where they can get away from other duties, the Campus Ministry Center will be available for that for ministers. And then the final item is just in conversation at this point, is if we have staff or interns, people interested in going deeper in Community of Christ, maybe wanting to go to seminary or just studying ministry more deeply and looking for a place to stay and be engaged in community, we'll have that as an option for people as well. And just to note that the mortgage balance has been paid through the World Church revolving loan fund. We didn't have funds for the whole amount. We did have a portion of it that came from the Carlton Sale Fund that was designated many years ago by the previous mission center for that purpose and Detroit properties. And then the remaining balance it'll stay on the mission center's balance sheet until we receive donations in the future. But we've paid it off with other funds we hold so that we don't have the ongoing interest payments as we're doing ministry there. I've got a few photos to share you if you've never been or seen the Campus Ministry Center. It's this large historic building. It's about 90 years old at this point, coming up on 100 sometime soon. Right on the highway in East Lansing, very close to MSU's campus. Inside, we've got a formal dining room area that can be used as meeting space with all the office and meeting supplies there. This part is accessible. For those with mobility challenges, it comes in from the side door. There are no steps to this meeting room, and there's a bathroom adjacent here also that has no steps. The living room area connects to the dining room. There's some more space. This does have 2 steps down into it, so it's not fully accessible, and the fireplace is not in use at this point, but it does have a great view of the Red Cedar River. And then the library I mentioned. That photo was a couple months ago, so the books are even more full now since we continue to add things to them and sort through. We've got a computer in there, a full printer, copier, big machine that the Mission Center owes. So lots of resources in there, a place to study, do research, prepare for classes, even teach a class from there. We do have fiber internet, so high speed, good quality internet there. On the second floor then, these do require stairs to get up. We have our first room, which still has a couple of the beds from the college housing days. These have been cut down a little bit lower, single beds in there. Then room 2 is the original master room of the house. We've changed these all over to more like a hostel hotel kind of stays. This room does have a half bathroom in the room. Room 3 This one, the bathroom is across the hallway. Room 4, these 4 rooms are all the original rooms in the house. This has a half bathroom attached to the room as well. And then room 5, which that loft is now gone. So we just have 2 twin beds in there with down at the end. This is one of the new apartments. And then finally, a quick picture of the 3rd floor, the very top floor of the building. It's kind of open social space. There's some games and study areas and different resources up there. So I just wanted to give you a quick tour. We are hoping to have sort of an open house possibly next month in June, where people could come in person, take tours, and then we'll also try to have an online either video tour or a more in-depth slideshow like this, kind of give you several pictures of all the rooms and give you the layout, and you can see everything that's available. We're hoping to do that sometime soon. Our last piece we're waiting on is the video conferencing equipment to be installed in the living room for the congregation and events like an open house. We're excited. If you know anyone who'd like to come stay for, again, a ministry purpose of some sort, or a small group or retreat, let us know. We are ready to start scheduling those kinds of events. And then my last slide here of reminders is just a refresher on the covenant principles for faithful priesthood ministry. We've been living with this for a few years now. These are on that big blue poster. You might remember they're in all the new temple school courses, and they're on all the templates for for ministry plans, I believe. These are the points that as ordained ministers and community of Christ, we should be trying to uphold and live out. These are abbreviated a bit. I cut them down and keep them on a slide. There is a link at the bottom there to click to get these in full. And I will send these slides out along with the link to the recording after today's meeting, so you have it and those who couldn't attend. Most of these are pretty subjective. Engage in faith and spiritual practices, affirm and promote Christ's mission, provide ministry consistent with the church's identity, mission, message, and beliefs. The one that's highlighted there in the middle is kind of my last point, and we'll transition into Lach sharing as well. Model generosity as a regular contributor to mission tithes. That's both local and worldwide. That one is more objective, and of course there's a record of that, and I just want to share with you as people who have accepted World Church Minister calls that as we are considering calls to elder, and as I make recommendations, and those of you who give recommendations to me as Mission Center president to send along for people to have World Church Minister calls, this one of having a recorded pattern of giving to worldwide and local is becoming more of a stumbling block in some cases because it is objective, and the First Presidency checks that. This can hold up priesthood calls. For first priesthood calls in congregations, it's usually not a barrier. We see it on the report, but pastors can meet with the candidate, present the call, and work with them to develop that pattern. We expect that's being done in the ordination preparation. But for people who have previously been called and are now being considered for a new office, there is a kind of less tolerance for not having that pattern already established, since they would have expected it had been done in the first process. So I'm not involved in approving those World Church Minister calls, but I know that we've had more and more in the last few years being held up or questioned or further examined because of that lack of recorded giving. And it's not to say that members or priesthood members aren't giving. Some are using cash, some are traveling, doing different things, and it's just not being recorded by using an envelope or e-tithing. So I want you to be aware of that as you're thinking of people to recommend or mentoring folks, working with other priesthood members to lift that up, and also to consider that yourselves. And Lach, if you had more to share on that, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
I'll just remind people that it's not about how much, it's just the pattern of giving. Could be $5, could be $10, but it needs to be regular. I think it's much easier to address that before you're talking to an individual candidate. So we need to get comfortable again talking about generosity in a congregational setting to groups, so that we don't end up having to have an individual conversation. Any questions on that? Concerns? We're a quiet group this morning. I'll move into a few things that I want to share. Remember that June 12 is the service that we're planning. It's going to be at, I think it's 4 a.m. for some parts of the world and 2 p.m. I believe for this part of the world, Central Time. But although it's late notice, the service, which is pre-recorded, is going to be made available the week before, so that if you are flexible in your worship planning, you could use it for your Sunday morning or afternoon or evening worship. So it will be available in advance if you want to use it for your worship that day. President Veazey is going to be sharing a message, the first of probably 5 or 6 messages, talking about the direction that we as a denomination will be heading in the next few years, and beginning the discussion about decentralization and what that might look like in some ways. As we're encountering more and more complexities in the world regarding employing people around the world and regarding moving money around the world, it is getting increasingly difficult to continue the work of the church in the way that we have traditionally been doing it. We've been employing everybody basically from the US, and it's just not working anymore. So we're going to be having some significant discussions about what might work in the future and what that might look like. So I think it would be of interest to you. Again, it's the first of a series of messages, but June 12, I would encourage you to join for that. The other thing I want to do is start sharing some of our World Church resolutions that we're going to have a chance to address at World Conference. Let me find them. Carefully have them all open and ready to go, but it's not working the way I had hoped. So we'll do it this way. Okay, can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see a resolution on the screen now?
Go out as screen share and go back in, and then maybe we will be able to.
We were seeing your folder, but not the resolution.
All right, how about now? Still no?
No.
Still seeing the folder.
Did you double click on G1?
I did.
It's not opening.
Mhm. I'll try one more time and then I'll just read them.
Does it give you the option to select the different one once it's open?
Let's try this one. How'd that, this one work?
There you go. That's it.
Okay. So this one, G1, and now let me back up and tell you that, as you know, there's a resolution from Michigan to allow online conferences. I mean, that's part of a section that's more administrative. We're not going to look at that one today because I think you're probably familiar with it. What we're going to focus on are the resolutions coming not from the presidency. So G1, the climate emergency, it's titled. And it is coming from
British Isles.
Yep, British Isles. And I'm going to focus on the resolved part.
Mute.
And you are the first in the church, other than the church leadership, to see these. We just got them. Somebody want to read the resolves?
I will. Resolved that Community of Christ joins with others in declaring a climate emergency, and be it further resolved that administrative representatives at every jurisdictional level, World Mission Center and congregation are encouraged to A, take responsibility for reducing carbon emissions resulting from church activities and encourage individuals to do the same. B, consider the impact of climate change on the environment when reviewing policies and strategies. And C, report those organizations and community groups that peacefully raise awareness of climate change and or peacefully take action to limit global warming. And be it further resolved that resources be developed by the Earth Stewardship Team to assist leaders and individuals in identifying ways to reduce carbon emissions. Do you want me to keep reading?
No.
Okay.
So at a mission center level, take responsibility for reducing carbon emissions resulting from church activities. So among the things to think about are, would there be budget implications? Are there amendments that you'd like to see? I'm guessing there will be spirited discussion on this one.
Well, I would just say that in Michigan, we did pass a resolution not on carbon specifically, but on environmental stewardship, and created a stewardship team, I think in 2013. So we've been trying to address some of these things and promote much of what's contained here.
So probably not controversial in Michigan.
I mean, I think there are lots of controversy about the details and how it all works out, but as far as general guidance, I don't, since these aren't requiring any particular actions,
Yep.
It's really open to interpretation.
Yeah.
I guess my comment would be that it's not so much that we talk about it as what the implementation end of it becomes. So I've seen some congregations where they've basically gone back to using their china instead of using anything that would end up in a landfill, basically.
Yep.
I don't know how you do it within resolves, but I think it really, the impact is helping people understand what the action steps are. And there's so many if you leave people for, here, you need to do something without action steps, I think it can be less effective. So I wonder if there could be a resolve that I don't know how to say it, but I just think it doesn't, I guess for me, this doesn't feel like it has a whole lot of teeth to it.
Maybe that last resolve, developing resources to help leaders and individuals identify ways to reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where you need to have action steps of showing what are the multiple things that you can do. And there's organizations like Interfaith Power and Light and just all these different places that are doing things that have teeth to them. And so I think that's what I'm looking at that going, is that there needs to be some sort of more actionable steps of, whether it's the Earth Stewardship team that creates them, that says, here's what the action steps can look like, that kind of thing. Because I think this can go out there and then people say, oh, we're doing it, but yet whether actually they're thinking about all the ways that they could be doing it and implementing it may not be done.
So would there be widespread support for using budgetary dollars to purchase carbon offsets for travel, for example?
The only problem I have with that concept basically is, who are you buying these carbon offsets from?
And it turns out some of them probably aren't offsetting very well.
If God has got a bank set up someplace where we can go and pay for a carbon offset, and God has figured out how he can take care of that, and it might be in climate change is the way it's being taken care of, I don't know, but that's just a postulation on my part. But the point is that carbon offsets don't do anything positive. All they do is they give you a buy on being responsible as to how you are adding to the carbon load in the environment. So you're just paying somebody to say, look the other way, please, and look at China or look at some other country, don't look at us.
Yep.
The other concern I have, we seem to be so myopically focused on carbon offsets, or not necessarily offset, just carbon emissions, that we have forgotten about the destruction that we're doing in our environment to eliminate those, for example, plants that generate and create oxygen and other things. So we need to look more broadly and balance to the kinds of things that we can do that really would affect us in a greater extent.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next one, if I can get it pulled up. Maybe I've learned how now. Actually, G2 calls on us to remove Doctrine and Covenants section 116 and put it in the historical records. And we're going to come back and talk about that one later in detail. So we'll jump to G3, which is, and I'll pull it up in a minute, resolution on racial justice. All right, you have it?
Yes.
Somebody want to read these resolves?
I can. Because Jesus has declared God's love for all the world and all creation, Community of Christ acknowledges that racism is a sin. We further acknowledge that not only our ancestors, but we ourselves have sinned by prejudiced thoughts or acts of silence, omission, or commission in the continued evil of racial injustice in our communities and nations. We express sorrow that we have sinned as our ancestors did. We've been wicked and evil, and be it further resolved that Community of Christ now calls for a renewed commitment, both in the church and in national cultures, to eliminate institutional racism and to affirm unequivocally that by biblical and theological precept, by the law of the church, by our mission and enduring principles, by World Conference pronouncement, and by leadership expressions, the aim of Community of Christ is nothing less than an inclusive church in an inclusive society. And be it further resolved that Community of Christ calls upon all its members, congregations, and jurisdictions to perform and share those faithful deeds of prayer, study, discernment, worship, love, justice, and nonviolent advocacy by group and individual actions in both the church, community, and nations, which will bring into reality a just, equitable, and peaceful world for all.
Initial thoughts?
My biggest problem with this one is, just as Sarah pointed out, there are no teeth here. And to assume that Community of Christ is inclusive is a problem all by itself. And to assume that the Community of Christ, through its actions or inactions, can create an inclusive society is another sticking point for me. You know, I've asked congregants many times, what is the peaceable kingdom that you are building in your lifetime look like at this point? Because that's what we're here for anyhow. We're building the peaceable kingdom. So what actions has your life taken so far to build it? What does it look like? And I don't know. Anyhow, I'll get off my soapbox log.
Anybody else?
I agree with Dean. I think that you know, it's nice statements, but how is it going to have further depth? How is it going to be carried out?
So there's always opportunities for amendments. Sometimes the challenge is crafting, though, a resolution that is not just US centric, that really is a world church resolution and can be implemented worldwide in the church.
Maybe it could say something like, and each mission center will provide those organizations in their communities that we could be a part of, or I mean, you know, words are not my thing, but just so that on a local level, here are the, because I don't believe in recreating the wheel. Like, I believe in joining those efforts that are already in motion, that are already doing good things. So maybe it could be the kind of thing where encourage each mission center to label those organizations that are doing this, and this kind of thing, so that it is on a local level, but provide some actionable organizations to be involved with.
It's clear that partnerships are important, increasingly
Mhm.
important for us.
Mm-hmm.
A list of potential partners.
Yeah, because there's a whole lot of organizations that are considered secular that are doing really great work that we can go be a part of without having to create it ourselves.
Yep. Okay, there's 9 of these, so we'll keep moving.
Aretha's here.
This one comes from Headwaters, but there's also one from Canada that says the same thing. me find it. There we go. And it is on baptism. Resolves kind of in the middle of the screen. Somebody want to read that one?
I can read it.
Oh, thank you.
Whereas our enduring principle of continuing revelation calls us to assess past instruction in the light of new knowledge, and to see sacraments not as rigid forms, but as vehicles of the Spirit. Therefore, be it resolved that the World Conference request the President of the Church to give additional prayer and study, seeking divine guidance on the issue of acceptability of persons who were baptized before the age of 8, becoming members of Community of Christ via confirmation.
Thoughts? We've talked about this before.
My first thought is that, okay, maybe they were babies when they were baptized and had no choice in it. But that choice to be confirmed is theirs and theirs alone. And shouldn't that be honored?
Anybody else?
I agree with Karen. I think we put too much emphasis on that. It eliminates a whole population. I was baptized as an infant in the Methodist Church, but was raised in our church, so I had the opportunity to be baptized at the age of 8. I think we're making a bigger issue out of it than it needs to be. If people have the opportunity for confirmation, they're dedicating themselves to the service of God, and I think I'm all for this part.
Suffer the little children to come unto me.
That's a study.
I was a little surprised at the perspective of some of our international members and leaders on this question. Unfortunately, in some parts of the world and parts of the world where the church is located, there's still pretty strong anti-Catholic sentiment. And so when some of our members would be very uncomfortable with this because of the association of infant baptism with Catholicism, which would again kind of surprise me.
I mean, from my perspective, it gives an option, not a requirement. That's how we've been treating it. But I also think the even broader question of who is a member and how do you become a member should be addressed at some point.
Yeah, as we've talked about, there's an increasing number of people with this postmodern worldview that are just not interested in official membership. They're interested in participation and often participate more than our members, but not interested in being officially a member, which means, of course, they can't be a conference delegate, they can't vote in congregational conferences, all kinds of negative implications for that.
And some of the best Christians I've known were those that were baptized as infants in the Catholic Church. So who am I to say that they are wrong in not having been baptized after they were 8 years of age?
Yeah, there are some compelling arguments for accepting infant baptism, and they're up against our very long tradition and tradition from the very beginning of believers' baptism. So it'll be an interesting discussion.
Having been a Catholic and baptized as a baby and joining this church at 21, I had no problem personally as an adult and joining the church and being baptized and confirmed. But to say that infant baptism is not to be recognized, which is where we are right now, creates categories. And we just talked about a resolution about equality and seeing all people as brothers and sisters. And yet we come to this resolution, we say, okay, here's a group that's acceptable and here's a group that's not for strictly confirmation. It seems like we're creating, it's my old Catholic upbringing, we're creating another category here that's inconsistent with what we said previously in resolution. Good point.
All right, we'll move on. G5, Universal Scripture Access. This one came out of the Beyond the Walls congregation in Toronto. All right, somebody new want to read that resolved?
I can do it. Resolved that the First Presidency or committee it so designates be directed to explore ways that digital editions of the scriptures be made available for no charge and be easy to access through the church's website or similar platform in Community of Christ current 3 core languages of English, Spanish, and French, and other language translations as they may be available.
What do you think?
Fully support.
I like it. The fly in the ointment is the cost and where the money's come from.
Yeah, it would be hugely expensive. This would say we should, if it passed and we actually did it, imagine the cost of translating the inspired version of the Bible into French and Spanish.
Do you mean it's not already translated?
It is not already translated.
About the other scriptures?
Book of Mormon is, I believe, not already translated.
Doctrine Covenants too?
Just recently. So we are on record as a denomination saying we are going to make our resources available in French, Spanish, and English. Although we have members, of course, that speak many other languages. We've said we're going to do those 3, but financially at this point, we are often not able to do that, which is extraordinarily frustrating to many of our members. You know, French is probably the most common language spoken in the church at this point, more common than English.
Well, I thought I ran into a copy of Das Buch Mormon.
You might have, but it probably wasn't ours. So members in French Polynesia sneak into the Mormon bookstore to buy Book of Mormons in French.
Ah, okay.
What if we began by offering in English and then move forward from there down the future in translating?
Yeah, maybe we should, but you still got to pay for it. At a time when resources, I'm sorry.
Just posting it, you have to pay a lot for it. I'm kind of ignorant in this.
Just to translate it.
No, I mean, we already have them all 3 in English. Why can't we make those available to begin with?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It is a little more complicated than just let's throw this PDF up. But that would be simpler. It probably took a year to get the Doctrine and Covenants up for Kindle. And we also would probably have legal agreements that we would potentially have challenges with because we have this legal agreement to get it up there on Kindle. You can buy it online. It's not too expensive. I don't remember the price. But that could be a bit of a challenge because we're contractually connected with that version at the moment. But it probably took somebody a year to get that done.
Well, Lach, I remember Arthur Oakman when I was very young. Arthur Oakman talking to some ministers. I was not one of them. And they were complaining about how overworked they were. And he says, "What are you doing between 2 and 4 in the morning?" So, you know, we could have guys like Joey Williams and other apostles who speak other languages. We could have them working between 2 and 4 to do these translations at no charge at all.
And I will say that speaking a language is different than being a translator of that language. It's a challenge. Now, technology is getting better, DeepL or Google Translate, but as it is, we're often now having to rely on Google Translate, and if we can, the translators that are employed by the church will try and clean it up. But you've probably heard my example. The Historic Sites Foundation was translating a document into French for World Conference using Google Translate. It was the story of the French Polynesian missionaries that sailed in 1843. One of them died on the way to French Polynesia. They buried him at sea. They dropped his body over the side and watched as the body sank to the bottom of the sea. And Google Translate turned the bottom of the sea into the sea's derriere. It's far from perfect.
So would the church use this as something to have as a special fundraiser to be able to do this, or would it have to be a line item for the budget?
I don't know. But it would be very, very expensive. Very expensive.
We have a wonderful platform for that, called GoFund Mission, that allows donors to show their passion and know what the cost is.
Mhm.
They're willing to use
That's
it.
what I was thinking.
My sense is this will have widespread support.
It would be helpful if there could be at least some broad parameters of what the potential costs would be to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe even broken down by book.
Yep. Okay, moving on. I don't think we'll read this one because it's very long. But I don't quite understand it yet. It's coming out of the Heart of Texas USA Mission Center. It's titled "A Resolution to Enhance Transparency, Openness, and Disclosure Concerning the First Presidency's Statement on Community of Christ's Position on Nonviolence." So remember that a number of years ago, by conference action, the presidency was instructed to come up with a statement on nonviolence. That is what is inspired, and then the pandemic got in the way, but that's what inspired the conversations that took place in the USA this spring online. And those conversations are going to be happening in the church around the world over the coming months. And they're gathering feedback for the first presidency to create this statement on nonviolence. So the folks in Heart of Texas are apparently nervous about what that statement might be. So here's the resolved. There's a bunch of them. So I think we'll just kind of hold this one until you can read it. And we'll move on to the next one. So this one is coming from the Council of 12. It's a resolution on marriage. Calls for the rescinding of World Conference Resolution 1182. So there are the resolves. I'm going to leave that up. Let's take a 5-minute break, but I'm going to leave that up so you can get familiar with it. So let's come back together. Let's say at 25 after the hour, we'll come back.
Get back to the darn thing.
Hopefully I have 1182, which would be rescinded on the screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
So World Conference Resolution 1182 on marriage and termination of marriage. This is from 1984. Among other things, it says that we recognize legal marriages. So it turns out that marriage is far more complex around the world than I ever understood. And this is probably not a surprise. Polygamy, for example, is legal in some nations. But 1182 says that we recognize legal marriages. Now, it also says monogamy is the basic principle. So there we go. The church upholds the validity of legal marriage authorized by civil and religious authorities. So that's 1182. I'm going to stop and then pull up another one. Actually, let me do something else first. All right, can you see a document that says marriage in the Northeast field?
Yes.
So when you perform a wedding, at what point is the couple married?
They sign the license.
Exactly, when they sign the license. So in our nation, there is the sacrament of marriage, and there is legal marriage or civil marriage. They are not the same thing, but in our nation, we've chosen to allow ministers to perform legal marriages, and they generally do it right after the sacrament of marriage is finished. So the sacrament is the ceremony that we witness, and we say, you know, husband and wife, whatever, but they're not legally married until the license is signed. But in other nations, it is done very differently. In many nations, ministers can't perform legal marriages. All they can do is bless a marriage. And it gets even more complex when you get into some nations where there are traditional marriages. For example, in many African nations, they have multiple different kinds of marriage, including traditional marriage. We might think of it as kind of a dowry. So the man's family would come to the spouse's family and they would negotiate. They don't think that they're buying a bride. They think they are honoring the bride's family, would be their understanding, but through these gifts. But they negotiate what the gifts would be. And it's not that that two people are marrying each other in those cultures. It is that the two families are being united. Marriage is a family thing. And in many countries, those traditional marriages are legal. They're recognized as marriage. Yeah. I started doing a little work on marriage, just marriage and marriage-like relationships just in our field, just in the Northeast. And so there are civil marriages, of course, what we think of as the kind of the legal marriage. There are religious marriages, the sacrament of marriage. There is common law marriage, still in this country, in our field. In these places, common law marriage still exists. In some nations, if you live with somebody for 6 months, you are legally married. There are still, in our field, in a few places, civil unions still exist. And there are also domestic partnerships in a few places in our field that are legal relationships. And of course, some of the challenges that we have in our field and elsewhere, priesthood calls are being delayed or never processed due to cohabitation. Young people are being released for cause or threatened with release due to cohabitation, even when they're engaged to be married. And we are often, not always, ignoring or dismissing cohabitation when it involves senior citizens. And often they would say, we're doing this for financial reasons. We will lose benefits if we legally marry. So for a number of complex reasons, we are hoping to contextualize a marriage and allow those local situations to be considered. So this resolution says, marriage is a sacrament, sacred covenant relationship of love and equality between two people, recognized as a valued institution in the cultures of the world, whereas understandings, definitions, practices, traditions, and laws regarding marriage and marriage-like relationships vary throughout the nations and cultures of the world, whereas the World Conference is counseled through Doctrine and Covenants 164.7b to address principles of behavior and relationships, but not decide specific policies for all nations when those decisions likely will cause serious harm in some of them. Be it resolved. Somebody want to read some of those resolves?
I will. If you show them.
What are you looking at? Sorry, I thought you were seeing them.
I'm seeing there are significant issues regarding priesthood calls and status.
All right, let me try again.
What's the earlier resolution?
There we go.
Resolved that WCR 1182 be rescinded, and be it further resolved that apostles have responsibility for establishing and upholding definitions, guidelines, practices, and policies regarding marriage and marriage-like relationships within nations or other geographic groupings where the laws, cultures, and traditions for marriage are similar, and resolve that all definitions, guidelines, practices, and policies developed by apostles be reviewed and approved by the Council of 12 and First Presidency prior to implementation, and resolved that all definitions, guidelines, practices, and policies are developed in harmony with the principle of monogamy, the Doctrine and Covenants 150.10a, are enduring principles, and the behavior and relationship principles of Christ-like love, mutual respect, responsibility, justice, covenant, and faithfulness identified in Doctrine and Covenants 164.6, and further explored in the commentary on principles, and resolved all definitions, guidelines, practices, and policies seek to uphold the worth of all persons, foster mutuality and equality, and protect the most vulnerable, and resolve that basic resources be recommended to assist in education before and after the sacrament of marriage that support marriage as lived relationship and model the principles identified above.
So we're hoping to be able to address questions related to marriage in the context of the various cultures around the world, which again, it's just far more complex than I ever dreamed. Questions?
Uh,
Concerns, thoughts?
Lon, are there concerns about the LGBTQ community with the kind of rules we have right now?
So most of those concerns we're able to address using national conferences. So I think we're trying to craft this in a way that is, whether it's a same-sex marriage or relationship or not, it's just all treated the same, would be the hope eventually.
You think that's clearly understood through this?
I don't know if you think it's not. Once you have a good chance to read it, you should say that. Let us know. So we're not specifically, because remember the denomination's position does not support same-sex marriage. The individual nations in some cases do. So because this would be a world church resolution, we're not really addressing it, knowing that in the local context they will.
Okay, thank you.
Lach, the question I have is, this is an intriguing look at a fallacy within the church's structure, because the church's structure is based in Western philosophy and Western mores. And we are trying to tell the world that we are a world church, and yet we are not honoring traditions and social dynamics of the rest of our brothers and sisters around the world.
Yes, that's where we're at right now.
So how much more of this are we going to be poking at for the next couple of world conferences?
Well, I think in almost any issue we address, when we look very hard, we realize that we're looking at it almost exclusively through a US lens. So it will depend on how important that becomes. But you know, we are proudly a worldwide denomination, but we do not act like it. Our policies don't reflect that. So that is part of the reason we're trying to move from policies to principles that can then be applied in the local context. Other thoughts?
Well, I would just make a comment that I certainly agree that we're looking at this through the lens of the United States, through our perspective, the way that it was, and hopefully we can broaden our understanding and stay open to the nuances in other cultures that we are globally involved in. So
you know, whenever we talk about marriage, we always get uncomfortable because of our connection to polygamy in the distant past. And in the not so distant past, we addressed it again more recently in some nations where polygamy was legal, and we had members, we had people from non-Christian cultures who were polygamists who discovered Christianity and wanted to become part of us, but were in polygamous marriages. And so we made the difficult decision in the 1960s to welcome those people as long as they would take no additional spouses and would raise their children to be monogamous. And for the most part, that's worked. I'm guessing there'll be good conversation on this one at conference. Dan, how's our time? When am I supposed to be done already?
We had initially planned 10:30 to break out, but I'll leave that to Sarah, Talitha, and Carol if they are okay with you spending more time or if they need to get into their groups.
I'm fine with him continuing.
Me too.
Me three.
Okay.
Too, yeah.
I'll move quicker too. Okay. Nope, didn't want to do that. Okay, this one. It's on Christian Zionism. It's a resolution opposing Christian Zionism. In part, Christian Zionism is interpreting the establishment of Israel as a necessary precursor to the return of Jesus Christ, is a misreading of the Bible, and conflates the Israel of the Bible with the modern nation state of Israel. So there's the resolves. Community of Christ formally rejects any historical complicity in narratives of Christian Zionism. The First Presidency be tasked with the development, maintenance, and promotion of educational materials and advocacy tools that will equip church members and associates in their efforts to promote peace in the region. Thoughts?
I'm incredibly confused.
Yeah.
My thought is that when we look at
I think somebody's talking, but I can't hear it.
oh,
There we go.
yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep. I think as a peace and justice church, we have to pay attention to the role in Palestine and places like that, and the relationship between Israel and Palestine.
Thoughts?
Is this an anachronism that basically was born out of the preaching charts?
Well, this is not just us. Christian Zionism, I think, is not uncommon.
Really?
Yeah.
So our concept of having to build the temple also in Jerusalem, as well as the one in Independence before Christ can come back, is our take on how it's supposed to work?
Well, I think that's different. So
Okay.
is it, who's the guy in Texas? Hagee? Anybody know who I'm talking about?
No, I don't.
It's this belief that Israel, the modern state of Israel, had to be reestablished. Which means some Christians are very supportive of Israel, but not concerned about Palestinians. There's some more of the whereases.
I'm confused, but wanting to learn. Is this saying that our wanting to create Zion is?
It's not. No. So that's part of the reason why some people think we shouldn't use the term Zion, because often, we've used it for a long time, but then Zionism came along, related to the modern state of Israel. So when we talk about Zion, it's different than Zionism.
Okay.
But it's easily confused.
Yeah.
I really do think that, so this number 4, Christian Zionism in interpreting the Bible or saying that some must suffer before the return of Christ, ignores the equal worth of all persons, excuses the oppression, occupation, displacement, and colonization of Palestinians, and thereby hinders progress towards a just peace in the region. So this really is trying to speak to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, I believe. But I think it's, again, a wonderful opportunity for me to learn more as well.
Is there a way to, I mean, I didn't get to read it fully, but is there a way to put in there so that at the very beginning, we are not talking about creating what we term as Zion, that Zion is different than Zionism?
I think somebody could amend it to do that, yes.
Okay.
Or try.
Seems to me that recently we've been describing Zion in our world more as a peaceable kingdom. And
Yep.
I think that seems to be more open to understanding what our interpretation of Zion is it's a peaceable kingdom.
Yeah. Whereas our friends to the north sometimes say the peaceable commonwealth, the commonwealth of God on earth.
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
So Zionism basically is just a pro-Israel stance.
Yes. I think people can be well, I'm going to stop there because I need to learn more. So this one is on compassion for refugees and the UN World Refugee Day. And it's calling on us. Somebody want to read those two resolves?
I can read them. That Community of Christ shows solidarity with refugees everywhere by urging church-wide awareness of the scope of refugee needs through the establishment of an annual Refugee Day coordinated with the United Nations World Refugee Day of June 20th. And be it further resolved that the World Conference requests the ecumenical and interfaith ministries team to collect and prepare multilingual resources, including potential worship resources and calls to action across the international church for mission centers, congregations, and groups to learn about, plan, collaborate, and implement refugee awareness support.
Thoughts?
Talk.
Yep.
I don't think it deals with the fact that we need to work at the real problem so that there's not refugees, so that the needs of the poor and the needy are met worldwide, not just special groups and planning and collaboration to implement refugees into one specific space.
So would you suggest some kind of amendment to put to focus on the problem and not the symptom, or?
Yeah, I think we need to focus on the problem that causes refugees more than on the fact that there's refugees, and start working as a world church and a community to meet the needs of the poor and needy as Christ has called us.
But what about the refugees that already exist?
Why are they refugees? What are we
Well, lots of
doing as a
reasons.
community of Christ to stop so that they're not need to be refugees?
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm a part of a refugee welcome alliance in my community. And it's so complicated with refugees, Ed, for a variety of reasons. We're trying now, our community initially, our government people said they weren't going to allow refugees to live in Waterford. Well, that's against the law. They can't do that. But they made a big splash about that. And so this little group of most of us are ministers in the area, trying to be supportive But the most we've been able to do in the past years is gather material for refugees, clothing, food. A lot of our items go to an organization called SARN that helps people as they come into the country. But I mean, I agree. If we had a peaceful world, we wouldn't have a need for refugees, or we wouldn't have any. But there's just so much work to be done in that area. I'm kind of glad to see the support from the church in making it important. Other churches have celebrated June 20th as Refugee Day for several years. It's not a new thing. It's just new for us.
Yeah. Okay, and we'll look at the last one, which I saved for last. Somebody want to read both the whereas and the resolved in this one?
I can do it, Lach.
Thank you.
Whereas section 116 of the Doctrine and Covenants, first given in 1865, has caused some concern and misunderstanding of our beliefs relating to the worth of all people and the inclusion of people of all races in the work of the church. Therefore, be it resolved that the first presidency consider removing section 116 from the Doctrine and Covenants and placing it in our historical records with other sections that have been removed.
Any thoughts?
Needs to go.
Yeah, how come?
Well, it reflects a time of racial sensitivity that is not where we should be.
You're saying we shouldn't be racially sensitive?
We shouldn't be racially insensitive to the point that we delineate value to different racial groups.
And so are we also gonna?
White skin should not be the prerequisite for activity as a priesthood member in Community of Christ.
But I don't think that's what section 116 says.
No, it just says that people of the Negro race should not be ordained, basically is what it says.
No, it says they should be ordained.
I just got done reading it. Huh?
Yeah, it says they should be ordained.
Does it?
Yep. Let's
Be
look at it
not
quickly.
hasty. Be not hasty in ordaining men of the Negro race.
That's right. Be not hasty.
Which is also what we said in 1984 about ordaining women.
How'd that work out?
And it's kind of the process we're going through now too. But it's the same advice through the generations, the same voice.
This is a longer presentation. We'll look at just very quickly. So Elijah Abel is our first Black member, baptized in 1832, ordained in 1836, an elder, and then a 70 also in 1836. Kwaku Walker Lewis, another prominent early Black member, baptized in 1842, ordained an elder 1843. It's his son, Enoch, marries a white woman in 1846, which infuriates Brigham Young and was one of the primary factors in why Brigham Young banned ordaining Black men in 1847. So in the earliest years of the church, we had Black members and Black men in priesthood offices. After Joseph Smith's death, Brigham Young stopped that, and that ban was in place until 1978 for the Mormons. After the Civil War, as it's coming to an end, we had very few, or maybe no, Black members. But the question is coming up, should we ordain Black men as the Civil War ends? We've put together a special council. It's the First Presidency, the Council of 12, and the Bishop. They're meeting in Illinois in May of '65, and they ask the question, but they're afraid to answer it. So they send Joseph Smith III to go and pray and ask for more light. He comes back with what would become section 116. It says, basically, you should ordain Black men. It uses the language priests, which Joseph III thought meant priesthood, but other members of the church thought it meant only the office of priest. And Joseph III thought that he would win eventually, so he didn't push on that as strongly as I wish he would have. It also says, "Be not hasty in ordaining men of the Negro race to offices in my church. For verily I say unto you, all are not acceptable unto me as servants," meaning priesthood. "Nevertheless, I will that all may be saved, but every man in his own order. And there are some who are chosen instruments to be ministers to their own race." That's uncomfortable. That sounds like segregation. "Be content, I the Lord have spoken it," which is particularly uncomfortable because it feels like that last sentence is reinforcing, "Be not hasty and all are not acceptable." But as I was looking at the manuscripts this week, I discovered that that last sentence, which we put in there as the end of section 116.4, is not supposed to be connected to that paragraph. It was supposed to be its own separate paragraph, reinforcing not the "be not hasty." It was supposed to reinforce the answer to the question. The question is, should Black men be ordained? The answer is yes. "Be ye content, the Lord has spoken it." So we have a misprint in the Doctrine and Covenants. Here's another of the two early manuscript versions. And again, you'll see that that last sentence is not supposed to be connected to that paragraph. So I believe the last sentence, "Be content, I the Lord have spoken it," was not intended to reinforce 116.4, but was rather reinforcing the answer to the question. So although this is uncomfortable today, this really was, I think, extraordinarily progressive in 1865, when we're asking the question and saying, yes, Black men should be ordained. Now, tragically, we didn't live up to that always, and we ended up with segregated congregations and had significant failures. But this was not a bad start in 1865. I think the reason that we end up probably connecting it is because we wanted to get the whole revelation on one page in the 1880 printing of the Doctrine and Covenants. So instead of having that dangling sentence on the next page, we just shifted it and put it on the bottom of that paragraph. Glenn has a question.
I was just going to say that the Battle Creek congregation in 1923 was ordered by the World Church to not be having worship together with Black and whites. And my really good friend, Richard Hawks, and I have put together and created a video about how his family and my family became together, and how my father took the vote to reunite the two congregations in Battle Creek when he was a 19-year-old deacon, became pastor of the Battle Creek congregation.
Being prophetic. Love it. All right. Just looking at the chats. Okay. Any other questions or comments, concerns?
Tends to work better, the right one.
Only comment.
Yep.
Sorry, Gary, unmute yourself.
We have a lot of scriptures that were based in a historical context. I don't think we want to remove all of those simply because it doesn't match our contemporary context either. And as Lach so eloquently outlined, this really is saying, yes, we should be ordaining blacks. So I would have a problem removing it to the historical section.
It should be the subject of more good discussion at leading up to conference. All right, I apologize, Dan, for going too long.
Thank you. Do you know when those will be available for people to read?
I think it should be in the next few weeks, but I can send them to you to share soon.
Are they still being edited?
I think they're done.
Okay.
I think they're probably being translated.
Some of the formatting didn't. Well, I think only one of those went to the resolutions committee for formatting and edits, but.
And some of these might be, Dan can speak to this better than I, but some of them might be ruled out of order. So we might end up not seeing some of them. Is that fair to say, Dan?
It's always up to the first presidency. There were some things that I don't think would stay in that format, just especially if they were adopted by the conference, but some of that would be editorial. But as you just pointed out, that can be important. So.
Yep.
Is it possible that section 116 might be edited to be corrected according to what you have just cited for us?
So my hope is to offer an amendment to 116 that would do just that. But I've not thought that through, and I've not talked to anybody about that yet.
Well, that was very educational in what you presented to us. And it would be helpful for that to be presented in a slide, just as you did for us.
Yeah, I'm guessing I'll end up presenting something at conference like that if I get a chance to speak to it. But yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay, for the last hour we have, we're planning to break out into priesthood offices, and I think I have those set up. So I'll be opening the breakout rooms in just a moment. You should go to the room with your priesthood office, and I think we can probably go until about 11:45, and we were planning to come back with those, just a brief report, or if you had more questions, and then a closing prayer from Carol Walden before we break at noon. So I'll open the rooms. You should see a message pop up that would allow you to join your breakout room.